You will be shocked to learn what happens to cannibal criminals in prison. My name is Knox, and today I will tell you the chilling stories of 5 of the most famous cannibals who shocked the world with their crimes. You will learn how they lived before their arrest, what drove them to commit such atrocities, and most importantly, what happens to them behind bars. And at the end, there will be an incredible story of a Japanese cannibal who not only escaped punishment but also became a real celebrity. I'll start with the man who shocked the entire world. Albert Fish. This maniac went down in history as the devil in a gray suit. And for good reason. Imagine New York in the early 20th century. Noisy, streets, cars, just starting to fill the city, and among all this, a man in a sharp gray suit. No one would have thought that. Behind such an unremarkable appearance lies one of the most terrifying monsters in US history. Albert Fish was born in 1869, and his life from the very beginning did not promise anything good. His father was already an old man when Fish was born, and his mother couldn't cope with the numerous children. To survive in any way, little Albert was sent to an orphanage. This is where his transformation into a monster begins. The orphanage where he spent his childhood was literally filled with violence. Children were subjected to brutal punishments for the slightest misdeeds, and Fish didn't just suffer from this. Soon he began to derive perverse pleasure from the pain he received. But this is just the beginning. Albert was growing older, and his sadistic tendencies only intensified. When he started a family, he had 6 children, and everything seemed more or less decent. A regular working man. But behind this mask lay a horrifying secret. Inside, Fish was consumed by an insatiable thirst for pain and death. He began to kill and, most horrifyingly, to eat his victims. One of his most famous cases, which literally shocked the world, happened in 1928. Fish met the Budd family. He presented himself as a respectable old man looking for a job for their son, but his true target was the little girl, Grace Budd. Under the pretense of a picnic, he convinced the parents to let the girl go with him. That day, they saw her for the last time. Fish brutally killed her and ate her. But the most horrifying part is that 7 years later, he wrote a letter to Grace's parents. In that letter, he detailed how he killed and cooked her body. Can you imagine what the parents felt reading such horrifying details? That letter became the key to his arrest. Fish hid for a long time, but the police eventually caught him. During interrogations, he calmly, even with some pride, recounted his crimes. He confessed that he had killed no fewer than 100 children. Even more shocking, he claimed that he ate them not because he was hungry, but because he derived pleasure from it. Now, imagine, what happens to a person like that in prison? The people who guarded him were horrified themselves. He was kept in a solitary cell, away from other inmates, because even among the most brutal criminals, there was fear of this man. The prisoners knew about his crimes and hated him. Many even threatened to take matters into their own hands. Fish waited a long time for his execution. He was sentenced to death in the electric chair in 1936, and there were also some gruesome details. Do you know what he said before his execution? He called it my greatest pleasure. Even death did not scare him. He saw it as a new source of pain and pleasure. Ironically, when he was executed, one of the witnesses said that the execution did not go quite smoothly. The first attempt did not work as expected, and he had to be executed a second time. But here's something else that's frightening. Before his execution, Fish wrote a final letter. It was never published in full because even the investigators said that what was written in it was too horrific to make public. He was a man who enjoyed his madness until the very end. If anyone can compete with Fish for the title of the most gruesome cannibal in history, it's definitely Jeffrey Dahmer, but his story is much more complicated. Unlike Fish, Dahmer grew up in a relatively normal family. His childhood wasn't as traumatic. However, his interest in dead bodies began to show in his youth. At 14, he started dismembering animal corpses he found dead on the road. And that was just the prelude. Dahmer's first murder occurred at 18 when he accidentally gave a young man a ride home. After that, his murders became increasingly brutal. He lured young men to his home, treated them to alcohol, and then killed them, dismembered their bodies, and ate them. But Dahmer didn't just consume his victims, he kept their body parts in the refrigerator and some he attempted to mummify. When he was finally caught in 1991, the police discovered horrifying artifacts in his apartment. Jars of formaldehyde, a refrigerator stuffed with body parts, and even skulls. But he kept on shelves. These were just the external attributes. Dahmer kept journals where he detailed his experiments in creating living zombies. He injected acid into the brains of his victims, trying to bend them to his will. Now imagine, this man ends up in prison. What's it like to be in the same room with him? How did other inmates treat him? At first, Dahmer tried to adapt to prison life. He even started seeing a psychologist and claimed that he realized his mistakes. But the truth is, his reputation was so terrible that other inmates were afraid of him. Even the most hardened killers couldn't accept what Dahmer did. He was attacked several times. Ultimately, in 1994, an inmate named Christopher Scarver attacked Dahmer and beat him to death with a metal bar while cleaning the prison bathroom. But there's a twist to this story. Scarver claimed he killed Dahmer because he laughed at his victims and constantly played pranks on other inmates, pretending to eat human remains. Now let's move to Germany. The story of Armin Meiwes is so unusual that it resembles a horror movie plot. This man became known as the cannibal by consent. Armin Meiwes didn't just kill and eat his victim, it was done with prior consent. Yes, the victim consented to his own death and subsequent consumption. It all started when Meiwes posted an ad on one of the forums for people with unconventional fantasies. He was looking for someone willing to voluntarily sacrifice themselves to be eaten. And surprisingly, such a person was found. His victim was Bernd Jürgen Brandes, who responded to this ad. They arranged to meet, and when the day came, Brandes voluntarily came to Mew's house. At his own request, Meiwes cut off one of Brandes' limbs and tried to cook it so they could eat it together. But Brandes died from blood loss. And Meiwes continued to butcher his body and stored the parts in the freezer, as if it were just food for the future. This case shocked the world so much that the trial for this crime became a media event followed by millions of people. Meiwes was sentenced to life in prison. But how does he live in prison? Surprisingly, his life in prison is much calmer than one might expect. Meiwes became something of a celebrity among inmates. He has written several books and is actively involved in community life behind bars. Meiwes claims that he regrets his actions and has now become a vegetarian. Many inmates view him with suspicion and even hatred, but due to his calm demeanor and isolation from the majority of criminals, he avoids serious conflicts. Although, as you might guess, his fate in prison is a constant reminder of how society can reject people for their darkest tendencies. Andrei Chikatilo, the Butcher of Rostov. Andrei Chikatilo, a name that needs no introduction in the post-Soviet space. This man took the lives of over 50 people, and his brutality shocked the entire world. He earned the nickname the Butcher of Rostov for the brutal murders and cannibalism he committed over the course of decades while remaining unnoticed by Soviet authorities. Chikatilo was born in 1936, during the difficult post-war years in the USSR. His childhood was overshadowed by hunger, repression, and his mother's stories about how his older brother was eaten during the famine years. This gruesome tale had a profound impact on the psyche of the future maniac. Gradually, his sexual frustration turned into aggression, and eventually, he began to kill. He committed his first murder in 1978, but his monstrous crime spree continued for over 10 years. Chikatilo lured his victims, often children and teenagers, to deserted areas where he brutally killed, dismembered, and ate some parts of their bodies. He enjoyed not only the killings but also the feeling of absolute power over his victims. But how was he caught? In 1991, after several failed attempts to apprehend the maniac, the police finally caught him at one of the train stations in Rostov-on-Don. During the interrogation, Chikatilo confessed to his crimes with chilling coldness, describing each case in detail. But what happened to him in prison? Chikatilo was isolated from other inmates because even among the most dangerous criminals, he was considered a monster. Many prisoners, upon learning of his crimes, demanded that he be executed immediately. However, Chikatilo, despite his terrible reputation, tried to portray himself as a sick person who supposedly didn't understand what he was doing. In court, he shouted strange things, tried to act crazy, but the court found him sane. In 1994, Chikatilo was executed by firing squad, and that day became a true relief for many. Even those who are usually against the death penalty considered his execution to be just. Japanese cannibal Issei Sagawa may be the most unusual character on our list. In 1981, Sagawa killed and ate his classmate. And here's the most astonishing part: he not only escaped serious punishment, but is still living freely. Sagawa came to France to study, where he met René Hartevelt, a student studying literature. One day, he invited her to his apartment under the pretense of wanting to discuss literature, but instead, he shot her and began to eat her body. Sagawa himself admitted that he had long dreamed of trying human flesh. And the victim became the embodiment of that dream for him. After he was caught, the French were shocked, but even more shocking was the fact that he was not convicted. The French court found him insane, and he was sent to a psychiatric facility. But shortly after that, he was deported back to Japan. And there, he was released, as the Japanese authorities did not consider his crimes sufficient to try him again. Now the question is, what does a person who killed and ate another person do after being released? Sagawa became a celebrity. Yes, that's right. He wrote books, appeared on television, and even acted in films. Instead of hiding, he made a career out of his gruesome story. This raises a lot of questions about how society perceives such people and why some criminals receive life sentences while others become media figures. Today, Sagawa continues to live in Japan. He has written books, appeared on television, and even acted in films. Instead of hiding, he made a career out of his gruesome story. If given the chance, he would repeat his crime. Which of the stories surprised you the most? Be sure to share your thoughts in the comments. If you love exploring dark themes, can write captivating stories, or want to try your hand at editing and voicing videos, check out our Telegram bot via the link in the description. We would be very happy to collaborate with you. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel, as there are many more interesting and unusual stories ahead.